we'll be FaceTime or something or talking on the phone. I'll grab that kid and just keep rubbing that ring in his face.
Work ethic's obviously very important as well.
When it's all said and done, I want 5 quarterbacks.
Recruiting, most important part of the game.
Do you want me to call you Mike or Magic? Because, there's the whole Magic. Yeah, I don't want to go there.
Oh, that's funny. I like that intro. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of This, That, and the Other. Tonight is the night that Hurricane Laura has come on shore as of about 1 o'clock this morning Central Time. So we want to send our prayers and thoughts out to all the people that may be affected by that weather situation. I know here in Arkansas, we did have some come through, some high winds, but at this point, my family, we're safe and sound, and we wish that, and for all the others that may be affected as well. But we'll get right to the show. We're joined tonight by zlionsfan, or Z as he likes to be called. Z, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I tell you, you've got a pretty good record there. 6,000 plus wins, 2,700 losses. So you're right at that 700 winning percentage, 91 championships for conference and a national championship. And you've been a member for 16 years. What brought you to What If Sports?
So it was a time in my life where I was looking for probably some kind of baseball sim, and back in the early 2000s, it was basically APBA and that kind of stuff. And that's all right. But I was just looking around for something different, stumbled onto the pro baseball sim, started up with that. And one thing led to another. And next thing you know, I'm playing in about 14 different things all at once. You know how that goes. So,
well, I see now you've got 11 teams, and I think there's 11 worlds. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of hard to have more than one team in a world. I'm not doing necessarily that well with the ones I got. So 11's probably about all I really want to do.
Well, that speaks to why you've had so many games. And if you're that tied up in that many teams, what do you do to keep each of those straight? Do you use some type of spreadsheet system, or is it just all up in the noggin?
Oh, no. I've tried that before, and it doesn't work so well. I have a big old Excel workbook that has a sheet on it, one column for each world, and then all the different times are color coded. So you have like recruiting's in this color, signings start here, signings end there, and then conference play, non-conference play, your schedule's lock here, you got to cut your players here. Even then, I still miss things every now and then. Like last night, I was on kind of late, and Bryant and Yost, you had to set your exhibition games by 11:59 that evening, or else you couldn't get your 3 games in. Well,
right.
The clock flips over. It's 12:02, and I'm going exhibition 1, exhibition 2. I go for the third one, and whoop, too late. You waited too long. So even with the workbook, there's some times where the workbook's telling me what to do, but you look at all those losses, you can see where some of them come from.
I have a similar setup where I have a Excel spreadsheet that has my recruiting page, and I dump all the recruits to, etc. But also maintain a listing of the worlds I'm active in and their schedules, like you said, as far as when games are being played, when recruiting starts. But I'm a victim like you are. The tool is there. I just don't use it properly. I either forget or think I'm too cocky and I don't need to look at it. I know what's going on.
Yeah, I got that. I'm ready. I know recruiting started. Whoa, oops. So this is actually a good time for this because we're good. The worlds where recruiting's active, I'm caught up. My classes are full. I don't know if they're good, but they're full. So perfect time to sit here and tell people how I got those 2,700 losses.
Well, tell us more about where you're from. Are you being affected by the storms, family life, what you do, anything you want to share?
So I live in the Indianapolis area. I've lived here for about 25 years, lived in Indiana for almost 50. And we're about as insulated as you can get from this stuff. If we get a hurricane up here, it's basically a lot of rain and nothing else. It's not an actual hurricane. It's more like, oh, I bet this is real bad, a few hundred miles south. So
yeah,
we don't even really get tornadoes here. Like tornadoes come to Indiana, but not this specific area. So it's not a bad place to be, weather wise. Gets pretty hot during the summer, pretty cold,
I've got an aunt that lives in Indianapolis along with some cousins, and if they're getting a hurricane, I'm gone because it had to come through Arkansas to get there.
Oh yeah, it would have been like a Cat 7 or something. We would be the Atlantic coast now if that had happened. It's not. We know we're pretty safe here.
Yeah, I would have to look north to see the beach.
You'd be on a boat.
Exactly. So what do you do as far as your daytime? I mean, are you a high school coach? Is that why you're into football?
Oh no, I'm actually a web programmer. So I actually went through an interview process with What If at one point. Awesome. Well, you know how that goes. What probably would have happened was they would have let me play in all the worlds, just be like, see, our programmers don't have any kind of advantage. Look at Z. If you guys think he has an advantage, you're dreaming. It was when I lived here in Indy, so the commute would have been a bad idea. Like if you're on the West Coast, a 2-hour commute isn't anything, but out here, 2 hours is 100 miles. I'm like, not a good idea. So I do not do online games. I don't do sports. So my life is a lot easier than other people's. You know how people get passionate about sports, passionate about gaming. You hear, we talk on shows like this about, do you believe the way that this works? I mean, I don't understand. Why is it that in Hoops Dynasty, something works this way, and Gridiron Dynasty it works that way, and Hardball it works completely different? Do they not even talk to each other? And, all I hear about is that one time where we accidentally sold a class ring for $5 or something like that. So,
oh wow,
it wasn't us. It was before our time. But I work at Herf Jones, and there was a point where years and years ago when we had different processes, apparently there was a way where when you put something in the cart, you could edit, like a customer could edit the price. And so that actually happened. And somebody brought it up, was like, hey, this isn't how we should be doing things. And people were mad because he was talking about it. Like, if you don't say the words, no one will know how to do it. Like, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works.
That's just crazy.
We're mostly insulated from customer feedback. So it's if you're a programmer, that's a pretty good place to be in. It's not like at What If where you could wake up one day and there's only 2 of you left and all the users think that you're dumb and don't care about anything. So, not that everyone says that, but
being a programmer, how do you find the platform here for What If Sports as far as the interaction between the human and the X's and O's, the ones and the zeros? Do you find it pretty user friendly, or are there some issues that you would definitely improve upon?
Well, the thing is that I'm actually the worst kind of person to ask about that, because the thing is, I can't really tell. I'm accustomed to having to dig through things, and in the code that I write, when we do something and we push it to production, sometimes there's something that maybe doesn't work quite right, or it wasn't the way that it was intended to work. And so I know how to do things like the hack in the pro baseball sim, where you can put it's like a starting shortstop. You can draft a shortstop as a second baseman by just changing one of the URL parameters. You're not supposed to be able to do it that way, but in a progressive league, it's helpful because there might be a time where your actual starting second baseman is a guy who's listed at short, but he played enough at second that he has a rating there and everything.
Right.
So there's a lot of things like that where the user interface, it's not where it needs to be, but the community is usually good enough at sharing things like, hey, if you just do this, then you can kind of get around that. There's other things like we know about up until the recruiting changes in Gridiron Dynasty, where you can't really. That there's, even as a programmer, I look at that and say, I don't know how to do 11 worlds worth of recruiting when I got to click on every individual recruit every single time. That's not. It's a wall that's big enough you can't climb over. So getting that's actually why I got back into all 11 worlds. That, and the only way I was going to get the top 10 wins list is if I'm in all 11 worlds and nobody else is, because you look at the losses, right? I mean,
you can't fault a guy for trying, right?
Well, it's there. I mean, I tried to do it with national championships, but apparently you can't just get those, or I might have 2 by now.
What about the Yahtzee tool? That is symbiotic of programmer. I mean, it does have its definite pros. The cons that I experienced with it was that not everybody knew how to use that tool. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the spreadsheets. You know, the tool is there, but you have to know how to use it and be able to use it. But I found that particular tool, well, I should say set of tools, to be very beneficial. And I didn't even know the full capability. So you as a programmer, how did you find that tool if you interacted with it at all?
So this might sound, well, it might not be a surprise when you look at my career record, but I've not actually used it before. So I spend time with on the guest site. So with, you know, some limited features, but at least to guide me in terms of, you know, good ratings formulas and an estimate of recruiting classes and things, but on a much more limited scale. On the pro sims, there were actually similar sites. There was a really good site that allowed you to build your baseball lineups for drafting for using a bunch of different tools that WIS's site didn't allow. And there was also one for hockey, which is kind of surprising because, you know, hockey has a passionate fan base, but it's really small. But it was exactly the same kind of thing where somebody took it into their own hands to kind of hook into WIS's stuff and provide a much better interface, basically to make the game a better experience. And unfortunately, I don't think those other tools are still around. And I know there's been some questions in the forums, obviously, since I don't use Yatzer. I don't know exactly what the status is, but people talking about, well, you know, is there a way to get data out of this? How do you do this? How do you do that? And sometimes it's that's what you get. It's kind of like, well, it's exactly like it's mods for a game. If you can't bring them into the game itself, there's going to be some limitations, but it's a lot better than if you're trying to do all this yourself. Like, I don't know how somebody, even with programming tools, if I wanted to do that in my spare time, which I don't, I like leaving the day job during the day, that's a ton of work. And if you don't get it right and you pass it out to people, you know, it's kind of a burden to bear. Plus, what am I going to do? Put tips on there. Hey, do you want to go 8-5? Let me show you how to go 8-5. First, second round playoff out. We got this. You know, top 25 recruiting class, by which I mean 21 to 25 every year. I don't care that there's only 18 humans in the world. You can do this. I know you can. You know, nobody needs that. They can do that on their own. They don't need my help.
I've apparently read your book because that's kind of where I fall as well.
Well, see, look, you know, I know a well-known TV show host who follows these instructions, and he's got it down to a science. If he can do it, you can do it. This is why people are lining up here. They're like, I knew it. I knew I could get to 7 and 6 was all I could. Now I can be 8 and 5. Thanks, Z.
Dad always said, excel at something. Mine was mediocrity.
Well, you know, Calvin said, I find my life easier the lower I keep everyone's expectations.
Exactly.
You know, that's kind of working for me.
Yeah. Let's go to the forums and see what some of the questions are that folks are asking. So we're going to go ahead and hit the first one today for tonight's show, and that is Scott 50 needs info on total rating versus role rating. And he's curious if should the role rating be the only thing that matters. Now, when you look at that cold, you say, yeah, you know, role rating is what matters because the total rating adds in stuff that's really not used. But then you actually analyze it, and there's a lot more to it. What do you see?
So I think basically exactly what you're thinking, that from an interface perspective, I kind of would want just the role, because if you don't know what you're doing, the default setting is total. I mean, I started off looking at total ratings because that's what's there. You have to dig in a little bit to see, wait a minute, if this quarterback is 60 points better than the other one, and it's because his tackling is 57, you know, maybe you need to look at that more closely. But there's maybe an argument that it's maybe a supporting feature, like if their role ratings are close, but one has a higher total rating, sometimes maybe some other category might have an impact somewhere. I don't know. It's a good question.
I agree with you in that mindset, simply because early on there was talk of the primary cores, and then you had the secondary cores, and there were principally 3 in each. And, you know, depending on the position, those cores changed, and not only did they change, but the value that was placed on each of those cores changed. For instance, blocking. There's no argument that blocking is important in your offensive line, your tight ends, and your fullbacks. But there is some concern. Is blocking a relative core to be concerned with for wide receivers? And I remember a Dev chat way back when that said something to the effect of, wide receivers don't block because blocking is factored into the offensive line and tight ends. And then your running back that is listed as your fullback, which is inherently the blocking back. So there's no scheme within the programming to consider a wide receiver's blocking. So, that being the case, if a wide receiver has a blocking rating of 100 and it knocks his total up over 800, but his core, in speed, elusiveness, athleticism, his technique, his hands, his game instinct, if you've got two wide receivers who have similar cores, just because this one has a much higher total is irrelevant if that total is the result of a super high durability, which doesn't matter at all now, or in this case, a blocking or tackling. So, one of the things a lot of the D3 coaches do is they marry that total rating and look at that and then wonder why their teams aren't successful. So, to answer Scott's question, yeah, it's role rating, hands down, and I have yet to be convinced that it's not the case. But the total shouldn't be used to make a decision just because of its value. If the total is high, look to see why it's high, because it could be in one of those secondary ratings. Your principal role ratings could match up, but then you've got a wide receiver, for instance, who, his work ethic may be a lot higher. And that's a whole different discussion. His athleticism may be a lot higher than the other one. And that's what pushes his total up. If that's the case, then yeah, total could be a deciding factor between two very similar core ratings or role ratings, as he refers them. And I know there's in-depth discussion on that going back years and years and years. So it's just a matter of doing some research, read the forums. That's been our pretty much standard spit here on this, that, and the others. Read the forums. There's tons of information in there. Can you think of anything else that would be pertinent to making a choice when it comes to role rating versus total rating?
Well, I was thinking one thing from kind of a programmer perspective is, as much as a dev might say, well, this is how I set up the engine. Sometimes what happens particularly in a complex program is you get unexpected complications. Some things would be like when they were trying to figure out, they're trying to get Hardball Dynasty to be essentially early 2000s baseball, and looking at frequency of doubles, frequency of home runs, that kind of thing. And I think at the time it was, well, there's too many doubles. We need to lower the doubles. Well, mentally it seems like, well, if we just kind of turn a dial down, we don't have as many doubles, but those doubles have to become something. And it's one thing if you're just rolling a die and one is a single, two is a double, you can just change twos to ones. But if you're simulating a ball being hit, well, you've got to change something about that ball, and now it's going to become something different. So going back to what you were talking about, hey, wide receivers don't block. Okay, if you're running a shotgun offense and you run a quarterback draw, and I wish I could remember his name, but I just had a game about a week or two ago against a guy who that's his thing. If you're successful in that kind of running game, you're running 5 on 11. The other wide receivers aren't doing anything at all. So what happens in the engine when a wide receiver comes up to a linebacker? He just kind of looks at him like, Deion Sanders, like, man, I don't know. I'd be interested to see feedback from guys who run all shotgun, because it would be interesting to see if you could kind of do, hey, this season I'm going to focus on blocking and see if it helps at all. This season I'm going to focus it and see if it maybe doesn't help at all. But those would still be smaller impacts, I would want to say. I think in general, just like the point you were hitting on, if you're going to look at something outside of the role rating, maybe look at individual categories that aren't part of it, but not necessarily the whole. If you're looking at total rating for something, I just wouldn't really do that.
Yeah, makes sense. It's akin to having a guy, for instance, the wide receiver situation you were talking about. Years ago, I tried a shotgun offense for quite some time. Can't even remember the school now. And what I tried to discern was, what, if any, impact do wide receivers have since they, quote unquote, don't block if I send them down the field and run the quarterback? And what I found was, taking the wide receivers down the field on the running plays, it just showed me the thought process that maybe somebody goes with them. And maybe they carry that cornerback or that linebacker, whoever's supposed to cover them, with them, leaving one less man to make the tackle. And we discussed that a bit on the previous show, but I didn't stay with it long enough, and I kick myself for it to this day, to actually make that definitive assessment of, yes, my running game is more productive across the board running my quarterback or another wide receiver in shotgun if I'm sending my other wide receivers deep every running play. So,
but then the thing there would be, it's not blocking, right?
Exactly.
So he'd still be right. You'd focus on speed and technique and things, because you want your receivers to run good routes to make the defensive backs be like, oh, I lost that guy, I got to go get him, because they're not looking at the quarterback.
Exactly. And so, if somebody out there wants to put that into a test, that would be a great test to find out what the value is of sending your wide receivers deep on running plays. I think we've beat that horse. You know what they say.
Don't you have like a stuffed horse you can bring up here as kind of a Exactly. You should get one for the next show.
KS Sparks wants to know how much recruiting budget carries over to the next season. Long timers will tell you the good old days are gone when it was 50%. You could get a pretty good class and save a lot of money, and you're kind of that was your intention, because you knew that half your money was coming back next season from your current recruiting budget. But years ago, they dropped it to 25%. So as we are today, only 25% of your existing budget carries over to the next year. Now, on this forum, I learned something, and I've always preached I learn something every day. An old timer like me learned something from the forum, and that was something that, for whatever reason, I never even thought about before. And that is, for instance, let's say you've got $10,000 in your recruiting budget, and you're at a D2, and you've got 10 recruits to sign. You've signed 5. You've got $10,000 left over, and for whatever reason, you don't offer scholarships. So now the recruiting period has ended. Mm-hmm. You've got an assistant who signs those bottom drag type players to your roster. For me, I have never been in that situation. Any time that I have had to use a assistant coach to sign a recruit for me was because I ran out of money. I didn't, go off and take a trip to Mars or something. But in this particular forum, it was brought up, and forgive me, I can't remember who mentioned it, that particular situation where you've got ample money, but for whatever reason, you don't just sign anybody. Now the AC comes in and he signs your class, but there's still money left. That money rolls over 25% to the next year. And I have never thought about that. So I'm not saying the individual said that is guaranteed, but the post as I read it was that he had experienced it, and on more than one occasion. And it makes sense that, if you've got money left, just because you didn't fill the class doesn't mean you should lose all your money. The AC will use however much money he needs out of your budget to fill the class. And in my case, it's always been, that last dollar is all I had left. So there was no money to carry over. Have you ever experienced that or seen the situation where there's ample money left? You sign your class with AC Sims and you get carryover money next year.
Oh, no, I'm like you. I literally couldn't tell you. I don't think in 600 plus seasons I ever had a time where I had money and open scholarships. I mean, it's one or the other. Either these days I have it where I usually have a pretty good, decent bank if we're not talking D3, or if you get down there, I'm in, $15, $18. I'm sending out one call per cycle because that's all I got left. So there's no extra anything. So I haven't had any experience, or if I did, it was back in the days where you had mentioned 50%. I want to say that back in the old days, it was 100% when they first started.
Wow. Yeah.
So as you can imagine, that made things completely different, especially when you're talking 1A elites and below that, the rush to get there. And it was probably one of those things where if they had tested pretty much all the dynasty games, they run through one or two quick seasons and then boom, it's got to be released. There wasn't any long-term testing to say, do you know what's going to happen if somebody signs half their class, signs an entire class with only half their money, and they carry over a full half year's money? What's going to happen after 4 years? You are never going to get them out of that school. Even at 25%, there's still guys who can build a decent bank. If you're in a good conference, you have a long playoff run. So, things like this, you could almost see somebody saying, well, shoot, I have my classes set up where I only have 3 guys coming in this year. I have 3 spots. I don't care. I'll just let the assistant coach recruit them all. I'll carry all my money over, a quarter of all my money, and then cut those guys and fill them next year.
Yeah,
I don't know that I'd recommend that, because when you have a really, really short class, that can be, you've got to kind of change your focus. But some people like it. You've played against the 50 guys in a class teams, right?
Yes.
That's
painful.
It's different. It's fun if you catch them as freshmen, though. That's fun.
Oh yeah.
As seniors,
you get your payback.
I lost one of my. And I had a national championship game against a 50 senior team and didn't manage to pull it off. It wasn't nearly as good in that situation, but
yeah, that's just a nightmare all the way around for an opponent once they're in the junior class, at least anyway. But, the whole carryover thing, I'm a proponent for sign your class. Don't let the AC sign for you at any cost, because as we've mentioned, a team that is without a human, those AC signees are much better. Those are the ones you see that schools are considering before the recruiting cycle starts. Those are the ones that get signed to those type schools that don't have a human. When the human is at the helm, then the AC goes to the bottom and picks off those scrubs. And for a good reason. Somebody, if it weren't that way, you wouldn't have to recruit. You just, like you said, let your AC go out and get those recruits and do his thing. You get a decent class. If your flaw in What If Sports were recruiting and you're a hell of a coach, a hell of a schemer, you can do that. But as we have learned, this game requires you to be a master of all facets if you're going to be highly successful. And recruiting is one of those fundamental issues that people run into when they wonder why they can't be successful. And it all boils back down to recruiting. You've got to get those guys. So I'm a proponent for getting the human signable guys versus the AC signable guys. I would rather spend, my last $2,000 or $3,000 on a sub player that's still going to be better what the AC can bring in, rather than take that $2,000 or $3,000 and have, $500 of it the following year. That $500, you throw that away. I would rather have that player. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, and I think to kind of build on that, maybe you could get away with one season of doing that. But if your intention is to be up in the top 5, the top 10 of the division you're in, you have to be able to recruit consistently year in, year out. I mean, the longest sustained success I've had is in D3, where things are quite a bit different. And even there, even at schools where I've been 40, 50 seasons and enough playoff appearances, good enough vision that I might not be able to see everything, but I'm pretty far up there. I still have times where my recruiting class will vary 8th, 10th, 12th. It's hard to stay up there if you know what you're doing. If you're just kind of banking on, well, I'll kind of tank recruiting it sort of, but I'll just do it through game planning and a D2 and above, I haven't seen it.
Not going to work.
Too many better coaches out there.
Let's see what Sir Biff has on the message board. He asks, how do you know if a recruit is going to sign with you? Do the recruit replies provide that info? I'll let you kick this one off.
People read recruit replies. Okay, well, nothing wrong with that. And some of that kind of goes back to earlier days where basically all we really wanted to know is, am I leading? Is anybody else there? And this is one thing where, depending on the dynasty you play, it's a whole different thing in Hoops Dynasty. But in Gridiron Dynasty, and there will be information in the replies, I think, that you'll be able to fill in. But for me, how I know is, for the most part, so going into signing day at, say, Howard and Wilkinson, signings at noon Eastern. So the last couple cycles before that, I go to my list and I say, I want to see all greens. Everybody's green? Okay. Do I have a scholarship offered for everyone? Because raise your hand if you've had signing day and you're looking at an entire class and nobody signed, and you know why? No scholarships. So you do that, you got your scholarships, you got your greens. You still don't know, because the one thing you can't tell is what other coaches are doing in the last recruiting cycle before signing, and then after that. All you can know is, I'm leading, I'm in front. If that doesn't change, if I'm green and that doesn't change and he's got a scholarship, he's going to sign.
So the messages that I read, because I don't read them all, I'd spend 3 hours each recruiting period just reading messages. The messages that I deem important or worthy of my attention are the ones that are telling me where the recruit is leaning after he has been offered a scholarship and after the signing starts. That's the critical part. For me to get a reply back from a recruit when I'm, sending him campus visits or home visits or whatever the case may be, or letters or phone calls when I use those, they kind of tell you a little bit, but recruits lie. So, you really can't trust those responses. The value is in knowing where you are in comparison to that other school that is on your recruit that has him yellow for you, or those 2 or 3 other ones. The replies such as, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm leaning toward another school. Yeah, unless you dump some money in it, or the other school signs all their class and leaves this guy out alone, you're not going to sign him. Or the reply that you get from the recruit that says, yeah, you're at the top of my list, but I'm considering letting some other schools continue to make their pitch, or however that's worded. That's basically what it's saying, is that, any little effort by any other school and he would leave your consideration, basically. So when you get those, depending on your financial situation, the value of that recruit for the importance of the roster, or even how much you've already dumped into the guy, take emotion out, because if you recruit with emotion, you're going to succeed at failing. You've got to take the emotion out, and you got to take the pride out. So you look at it, and what's the value of throwing more money into this recruit if he's already telling you that he's considering somebody else? Now, the other ones that I like is, the recruit that will tell you, I'm trying to think of the verbiage in there now, but basically he's telling you don't even bother. You get that response where it's like, yeah, I'm out of here. Next cycle, I'm gone. That type of message. Those are the ones that tell you how that recruit at the end of that cycle, where that response was generated, how he is positioned. Now, bear in mind, we all know it's happened. You get that letter from, or that scholarship reply, about your scholarship offer. Coach, I'm coming to your school no matter what happens. And you're like, okay, good. So I don't have to dump any more money into this guy, because he is so leaning my way that there's no way the other coach can get him. And then lo and behold, you're looking after the next cycle to see where you're standing with him, and he's signed with the other school. And that's because he has put in enough effort to get him to go to his school without even giving you the consideration of knowing that he was thinking about going somewhere else. And that's where you really have to look at those replies and set them up into those categories and discern what they mean based on what he's telling you, who the other recruit is. And, one of the big mistakes a lot of people make, and I was guilty of it, is seeing that reply that says, I'm going to go to another school unless something major happens. I turn around and throw, 6 or 7 campus visits at this guy, hoping to get him to even lean my way a little bit more. And then I find out, well, the other school has already signed all of their class. He's got no open scholarships left. So no matter what this guy is telling me, if the other school is the only one on him, I don't need to throw any more money on this guy, because unless somebody else comes in, he's going to sign with me because it's just me and the other school. And even though he don't like me today, he's going to love me later, as Coach Brown from NDU out there at Kansas said, hate me now, love me later. Because the other school can't do anything about it. They've signed their class. So a lot of people need to understand, when you're recruiting, especially now that we've got the recruiting update where you can actually go in the player tab and hit that considering, see how many scholarships they've got left. Do yourself the favor of knowing your recruit's position, knowing your opponent's place, and how much do you look at your opponent when it comes to recruiting, as far as their needs, their tendencies, what their particular targets are for that cycle.
So, and what this is kind of a compliment to what the question is about. Hey, so as a coach who looks at recruiting replies, this is what I do. And I think you explained that really well. This is how I do it when I don't look at recruiting replies. And it's exactly what you're talking about. I have to focus more on who am I recruiting against. So once you're there, sometimes it only takes one season. Who likes to go and throw out feelers long away from home? Who just basically recruits in their area? When somebody's that considering tab, that is my number one source. When I see someone and they're yellow or red, I'm like, how far away are they? Is it farther than I am? How many scholarships do they have? And then since I've been around, I'm in all the worlds. What do I know about how they recruit? Is this a guy who will recruit at a distance and he knows exactly what he's doing? Sometimes I'll look at their GD profile. Are they relatively new? Is this maybe somebody who just doesn't really know what they're doing and maybe they overextended? Is it somebody who has a lot of experience? So maybe there's a reason why they're on there, because you got to take all this into consideration. If you're not getting any other feedback, when I'm looking at each cycle, who's yellow? How much did I put into them? Are they still yellow? I'm kind of running things in my head like, okay, this is a battle I think I can win. These two are maybe 50-50s. This one, I already quit on that. So I look at the ones that I quit on. So, because sometimes what will happen is even a coach in a higher division, they'll see you and they're like, well, this was only a backup for me, so I'm not going to take them either. And so they're just sitting there. But usually, if that next cycle they turn red, then it's like, okay, that validates my decision. I'm not going after them. The 50-50s, it's mirroring those replies. What I'm looking for is, how much effort am I putting in, and are they staying yellow? The longer they stay yellow, the more I have to think about, look, I have to have a contingency plan. So I start getting my backups. All right, now I've got backups at for each of those 50-50s. I can push on the ones I think I can get. And then go back to most of my battles tend to occur before signing. So I don't have as much of that ongoing stuff where you have to be real careful. But that's when you get more information, because for me, pre-signing, nothing changes. Nobody signed yet, so those numbers are going to be the same. But it's absolutely critical to go out there and look, because they could have filled their class at noon on the first day. And just like you're saying, if you're thinking, ooh, but I got to keep no. Go look at their class. And you can sometimes, depending on where you are, particularly if they're in the same area as you, you can start looking for people in your 360, say, who are unsigned, and you can actually look for who else are they on. Do they have a bunch of targets? Because maybe if they do, I can push them off this one and they'll just go get somebody else. If they're in a bunch of targets, but they're all yellow, you might be the primary battle. So you got to balance all of that, and it's still a guessing game. There's really no way to know. And the important thing is, it's mostly, the more important that recruit is to you, the more you have to be willing to push him if you have to. Because if you wait and they get away from you, maybe you could have done something about it. If you put a little too much money in a guy who's a key to your class, I mean, you're only going to keep a quarter of that for next season anyway.
Exactly.
Not such a bad thing.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. I'd rather dump that extra money into the here and now versus, losing a quarter of it or keeping a quarter of it next cycle or next recruiting season. And, talking about the messages that you can get that message that says, Coach, I'm coming to your school no matter what happens. And the guy you're battling with doesn't put quite enough money in to get him completely off the table, but he does put enough in to sway that recruit's lean, and you'll get a message even without initiating any type of scholarship. You've already got one on him. And what I mean by that is, to back up, is early on in my career, I would take a scholarship and see the post-signing initiation cycle to see what kind of message I got back. And I would see if anything changed by removing that scholarship and sending another one. Basically, it cost me $100, and I didn't realize that at the time, to see what the next message would be, which was a major catastrophe. So what I've learned is, unless you get a second message, you send that one scholarship offer, he sends you a message and, Coach, I'm coming to you. Unless you get that second message, the only way you're going to lose that recruit is the way I mentioned earlier, where the guy just dumps the rest of his van load of money on him, or you get that backup message a cycle or two later that says, Coach, I'm thinking I'm better off someplace else. What that tells you is that other coach has dumped substantial money on him to get that recruit to lean to his school, but not enough to get him totally committed. At that point, your decision-making kicks in. Like you mentioned, do I dump more money on this guy? Do I go ahead and look elsewhere? So, don't think that just because you didn't get a second message or whatever the case may be, you're going to lose him. And that's kind of what he was asking, I believe. Look at the message, understand what it's telling you. And if he's leaning your way with a solid lean and you don't do anything else, unless the other coach jumps the gun and just dumps all that money on him, he's going to come to you more than likely. Unless you get.
There's a third thing, The third thing is, how many scholarships did you offer? Did you offer as many as you have, or did you offer one extra? Because you don't get to choose the off. And I've had that happen before, where I'm all like, I got my class, and then I don't win that battle. Or what's worse is he's like, and I don't remember the wording, but it's like, well, I went to sign with you, but Mr. Smarty Coach doesn't have any scholarships left. And I'm going back, wait, what happened? And it was one of those things where I offered a scholarship to my backup. He signed because, of course, he's been green the whole time. And whoops,
because he sucks.
I got no room. Yeah, right. And it's not like you can cut him right there. It's like, so again, kind of like what you talked about. Be careful when you give out those scholarships, because if you're not paying attention for a cycle, they might sign. That's what the scholarship's for.
Exactly. And that's one of the beauties of this game is, a lot of coaches, I'm sure, would rather play against Sims, where they have the tendency to have an easier run at it, an easier schedule, a lot less stress. But, a lot of that is a given. It's like Groundhog Day. You're doing the same thing over and over and over. Where's the fun in that? It's your money. Spend it, play it however you want. I don't fault you for that. But I know that the allure of this game is the fact that there are other humans, that there are those human factors that can change the game substantially in a matter of, one game or one recruiting cycle or one bowl game or one playoff game. Your entire season can go off the rails or fall onto the rails depending on the situation. And that's what I like about it. That's one of the beauties of this setup, is that there are other coaches that can make things happen and make things change for you. I think we've pretty much run the end of that with the questions. Let's get back to you as far as your career goes. You've got that one national championship. I don't have to ask you, but you remember where that was and how you got it?
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is it's actually a pretty good story for those of you out there who maybe aren't quite having the success you were hoping for. I'd been
that's
at
our time
Rose.
for today. We got to go.
I knew this would happen. So I've been at Rose for forever. If you look at my camp record, basically that when I came back to GD like 3 or 4 years ago, I started it again at D3 and Rose and then Wabash and Yost were the ones where I'd been there a long time. But I basically peaked quarterfinals, had a couple Final Four runs, but nothing really. Hadn't been in the Final Four for maybe 12 seasons. So I'm like, all right, if I don't get any farther, I'm moving up. Got my usual first 2 playoff wins because once you have top 8 talent in D3, you're basically okay. What's in the quarterfinals? What are we doing from there? I'm playing T-Book, who's a solid coach, and halftime I'm down like 24-7. I'm like, well, all right. So it's 3 o'clock because I'm Eastern time, and so I'm going through the 1AA conferences because I figure I had enough success I could at least try the double jump and look down. It's like, okay, I think this is the school I want to go to. I wonder how long it's been since I actually made it to a Final Four. So I click on my profile and look it up, and I see the 4 by this year. I'm like, 4? What happened there? So I open up look at the page, and I won. We came back and won in the quarters. I'm like in the semis. I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. So in the semis, I'm playing Kay Trotter at Merchant Marine, and I had whooped him in non-conference play because I caught him on a day where he wasn't able to do his game plans. But, you're an experienced coach. Non-conference play is not always that important. Once you're a playoff team, sometimes it's maybe you're experimenting with things or you have younger players or whatever. Right. You can't take that result because playoff football is completely different. And sure enough, halftime, trailing. So I'll admit here in D3, most people who are in both D3 and above know D3 is real scaled down. So there's a limit to what you can do with your game plans. So I hadn't really done a ton of adjusting. Just this is what I think I can do. So now I'm having to go back and actually do specific stuff because I know I got a chance here. And somehow managed to pull it off. So I'm in the finals. I'm facing Wiredon at Pomona Pitzer. But the thing is, he's in the SCAC with me. He beat me in conference play, and he beat me in the conference championship. And I'm trailing at halftime. And so now it's like, okay, this is an NC. I don't have any. I got to get one. I have to make this work. So this is, I'm not that great at game planning. I got to make this work somehow. So I'm going back through and looking at his tendencies because I got 2.5 games to look through. Like, okay, these plays seem to be working. I need to try to do this. And I did make some adjustments. There's some stuff you can do that the good D3 coaches know about this. And we managed to pull it off. The funniest thing about it is, about a year or so ago, Wish used to send you emails from your site mail, so like about certain things. And one of them was about national championships. So if you won a national championship, what I read, I obviously hadn't, but what I read was you got a email about it. So you can't check your email on like a game 7 for basketball or that kind of thing because it'll tell you. Well, I didn't get an email, and I had forgotten that they stopped sending those out like a year ago. So I go and check, and I got the W, and it was really exciting because I didn't have any, but it was also kind of funny that I had to do it coming from behind, and then I ended up, it's hard to beat a team 3 times in a season. It probably was, but it was also real fortunate because any one of those games, a couple plays go a different way and I don't have the title. But that's kind of one of the things about playoff football. There's so many good coaches out there that you can have a championship caliber team and not win because something doesn't go your way. And you just have to acknowledge that, hey, it might be 600 seasons before I get another one. It doesn't mean I didn't have good teams, just wasn't my year. Someone was better, And
there are times when I've done that, yep.
It's kind of like you were saying, that's the thing about it being basically an MMO is nothing's guaranteed. You can never be good enough that you have things where you are going to win. If you look at the best coaches in the game and then you look at the number of seasons they play, the number of national championships they have, it's not 1-to-1 as much as it might feel that way. They get beat, and they can get beaten early in the playoffs sometimes too. They're working just like you are. They may be a lot better than we are at it, but you can't max it out. You can't just be like 12 in a row, no big deal. And that's it. It gives us little guys some hope, but it's fun too, because that's kind of what draws people to football in the first place is, let's see if Purdue can actually have a season where all their good players can play or something like that. I'm a Purdue grad, so that's, I'm also the career wins leader in camp, I think, at Purdue from the version 1 years where, of course you make it up to your alma mater. And if it's Purdue, you can go there and nobody cares because nobody else is going to get it, And who doesn't want to recruit against Notre Dame and Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State? It's fantastic. Let me tell you about that.
Yeah.
But they kept me. I made bowls, and it was kind of like real life, Hey, good job. You got 7 wins. That's awesome. We don't care if you don't do anything else. I really appreciate how they put that in the game.
Yeah, the game really speaks to you at certain times, even though it is just computer generated stuff. It really, I think my favorite one is when you get, you're at a school that has sucked, they're prolific suckage, and they've never won more than about 3 games a year. And you go there your first year, 7 wins. Yeah, you got 6 losses. It's a winning season. They're first in 100 seasons. And you get that end of year email that says, tough year, coach. We just want to know.
Tough year? What are you talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
I got more wins than you had the last 10 seasons. What's the,
some comedy times.
I don't know if you've had this personally, but I've had a couple of teams recently where my team got its first ever win against another school. And this is like, 100 plus seasons in. And it's that same kind of thing where you're like, yeah, now we're 158 against this other school. And, it's D2, it's a little different because you're not getting fired or anything, but you still, you don't get that kind of gratitude from the athletic director. It's like,
right.
What do you think this happens every season? What is this, man? What are these expectations?
We have a winning streak against them. They don't have one against us.
Right. What do you want? Do you want me to go back? I can't erase those losses, I might know developers, but they don't do anything I say. If they did, don't you think I'd have 2 championships by now? I might have 3.
Absolutely. Well, before we close here, what are your goals in GD? What is the ultimate thing you want to accomplish before you turn the computer off?
Well, the next one is to coach in all 50 states. Now, we know there's no Alaska teams, but there is a District of Columbia team or 2. And I'm 2 states away. I've been working at it for a long time, and the only 2 states I'm missing are Hawaii and Wyoming. And let me tell you, I am not looking forward to that. No, basically, I'm going to go up to the WAC. I'm going to get crushed. It's going to be awful. Recruiting is going to be awful. I have coached because I've coached at Boise State and Utah State, I think. So some 1A experience where you look around and there's nobody, and the power conference schools are recruiting the other ones, and you're like, how am I going to make a team out of this? But it's fun because it's a challenge. 1A for me is a challenge anyway. But it's like, you want to just see what's it like. What's it going to be like to be in Hawaii? And there's one guy who's graduated this, because apparently I sort of got into it with the original dev a long, long time ago when I was at Boise State. And I'm like, look, I looked up how many high schools there are in Boise. Okay. This is about how many seniors graduate every year. So this season, because they don't really distribute recruits geographically, like there's 2 guys, 2 linebackers in the entire state of Idaho across all divisions, 2 guys. Where did all the other graduates go? Where did all the other high school seniors who are playing linebacker go? He's like, oh, well, we don't really do it that way. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Go over to like Washington or Oregon and say, hey, would you guys mind just not spending a bunch of money? Because I need linebackers. Could you? That's like, no. It's like, but the thing is, people win there. People win at Hawaii.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And that shows you, yeah, it kind of sucks if you don't know what you're doing, but you know what? Some people make it work. So there's a way to do it.
They're able to do it successfully, not just
not just
one-offs.
Exactly.
It's consistency and success.
I think the first guy I remember doing that was V. Howard way back at Hawaii, and we were all looking at like, how is he recruiting like that in Hawaii? I'm in the mainland U.S. and I'm struggling. Like, but
exactly
because it can be done, and if he can do it, other people can do it too, and they have. But just kind of doing that because, you know, we don't. I don't know offhand how many NCs you have, but I have to like lower my sights a little bit. Yeah, so like that's my goal. One day I want to be the winningest active coach with 2 national championships, because I spent all this time behind SJU Rat with none, and now that I have one, I'm the second winningest coach because Bermiro has more wins. And we know how the active list works, so there's a bunch of coaches with more wins, but it doesn't count because they're not there. But if I get 2, I'm number 1. I am number 1. That's it. I don't know how that's going to happen, because if you've looked at my record outside of D3, there's not a whole lot of Final Fours in it, but that's all right. That's details. We'll work that out later.
That's later on.
Yeah.
Well,
that's why I'm playing Hoops Dynasty.
There you go. Well, I appreciate you being with us tonight. Definitely brought some insight, and especially the goal of coaching all 50 states. I've not heard that before. I've not even thought about it. So congratulations.
There's a reason for that.
That one, and make it happen. You've got 2 to go. Don't give up. Don't be shy. Jump in there and go after that one recruit in Hawaii when you get a chance.
I'll do that. Thanks for having me. That's a great show, and I'm pleased to be on it.
Anytime. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of This, That, and the Other. Come back next Thursday night and join us then. I'm Magic. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us.